Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Um, I'm Luke. I'm currently based in Vietnam, in Saigon, as head of language acquisition at Renaissance International School. Um, Today, I'd like to just talk you through and share some of our processes that we've been working on this year, which fits quite nicely with this theme of from chit chat to academic fluency. Um, And as was mentioned, the theme is going to be leading change to create a whole school contextualized approach to language acquisition. It'll hopefully
Should
the presentation.
should I switch to the next slide?
Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Okay, so what we'll talk about today. Well, today we're going to talk about the process, like I just said, and how we approach change. Because obviously, in any organization, making change is a daunting task, and it's scary. We found it requires quite a lot of courage to be able to reflect on what you're currently doing and to be honest with yourselves. And in doing that, you've got to create buy-in. You've got to get people on side so we feel safe and secure. I'd like to talk about the changes that we're making and that we've not completed this change, obviously, because change is a process that's ongoing. And the catalyst for this change that I'll talk about in a minute was the fact that we were moving towards being an IB school. With IBPYP and IBMYP. So it's going to be a years long process, this hopefully, to where we get Renaissance to where we want to be, which is students being multilingual and academically proficient in not only their home language and English, but an additional language as well. As I'm working through this PowerPoint, I'm going to be using we, us, and our because the change, obviously, it's not my change, and it's owned by the team of teachers that I am lucky enough to work with. Sorry, we're still on this second slide. One thing that at the start of this process, that I remembered was this quote from Christopher Garetti, where it says, "The most striking thing about change is that almost all of it fails," um, which is terrifying in itself. And it's something that I was incredibly mindful of, that the resistance to change is the thing that makes it fail most of the time. So as I said, I wanted to make it into a whole team process of change to get all of the language teachers on board, as well as the whole school community on board. Um, but the major question was like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to join up the Mandarin department, French department, Vietnamese, and EAL departments, and get us all working together? So I'd like to share this process today and then hopefully get some ideas from you guys later on about how you do it in your schools. Next slide, please. Thank you. First thing that we needed to do was create buy-in. The first question that we asked was, why are we making these changes? At the end of the day, the students were performing incredibly well with their international competition and tests, especially in Mandarin and in French as well. So the legitimate question from teachers was, why do we need to make this change? Why do we need to go from chit chat to more academic? But as it's set out by the IB, we believe that all of the students should have the opportunity to be proficient in an additional language. Also, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my daughter. She's having a bit of a 4-year-old tantrum. Sorry. Um, and as it was set out in our mission and vision as well, that we want all students to be able to be multilingual communicators. So in this process, we had to get not only teachers on board, but we got students on board by asking them what they expected of us and what they expect from the language program at school. Um, and basically, what we found out was that the students and their parents obviously wanted to be able to be proficient in the languages that we offer. So our approach to that was then to make language teaching authentic and interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, depending on what part of the school the students are in. And that was also in line with our mission and vision. Next slide, please. So the key to this, what we thought when we were making this change, was at its core was to give ownership to the community. So in the past, what's happened, I think, is as heads of department, we've enacted these changes and written new policies and introduced curriculum, but we didn't necessarily get the teaching staff on site. So at its core was an empowered language acquisition team of expert teachers from around the world who were then going to be the implementers of this change. They were going to be like what we call the coalition of the willing, basically, that hopefully they'd be on side and they'd see the reason why we're doing this and they'd be able to lead this change as a team. After this buy-in was created, and a collaborative approach to developing policy, curriculum, and assessment was taken. So what happened was, rather than me dictate what was happening or the heads of school dictate what was happening, we put the current language acquisition policy out there for teachers to review and for them to give feedback on. And then we encouraged them to write sections of the policy with us so that that ownership was really taken on board. And when we were living this policy and when we were living the curriculum that we later developed, it belonged to all of us. That was the main point. And the reason we were doing this was because we needed to get a joined up curriculum with shared statements so that we were all working towards the same points. And this was based on feedback from students who were picking up differences in lessons. We weren't consistently applying our own definition of excellent teaching and learning, basically. So the feedback was that we needed to have these joint curriculum and joint statements to help us. And getting everyone on board was really important because, as we said, change is scary. And as teachers, we had a lot of questions. It was like questions of what do our community actually expect from us? And how can we support these expectations? And the main thing is because students only have 3 to 4 lessons of second language each week. The teachers are obviously concerned, like, how can we actually successfully get the students from chit chat to academic fluency in limited time? So we had to be realistic with our expectations as well. Next slide, please. So as we went towards leading this change, the key thing that we had to do to enable successful change was to demystify it at the end of the day. So we set out by creating clear targets together and clear, realistic timings of what needed to be achieved. And again, this wasn't done by me or the heads of school telling teachers what we were doing, when we were doing. We asked the teaching team when they honestly thought they could get these tasks done by, what's a realistic timeline, and how could we do it in that time to the highest quality. And the idea was to make the outcome tangible. So it had to be linked to something that we all knew. And in this case, we chose to use the CEFR levels as a basis for our curriculum. It's what we were using in primary for the EAL descriptors as it was. So the idea was that this would help support language acquisition NYP by giving the students the skills required using a shared curriculum. So what we did was we adapted the CFR levels to match French, Chinese, and Vietnamese as well as English. So when students go from their mainstream lessons into a language lesson and they know that their targets are actually linked and everyone's working towards the same language expectations. This shift in mindset obviously had to be shared and adapted for each language. The timeline that we formulated with staff was then shared with the community, so we all knew what we were doing and when we had to do it. The teachers were at the fore for this. So like it says on the screen, we flipped the waterfall. Rather than all the information coming down from above from the leadership team, we wanted these ideas and these realistic curriculum statements to be coming from the teachers who are the experts. So teachers and TAs in the department were involved in this process, and effectively they took the curriculum away with them for a number of weeks, and they then adapted it for their language and for their setting based on number of hours that they get to teach the students and based on our aspirational goals to make sure that our students are academically fluent in the language that they study. So the idea was then to use a contextualized approach to language learning, similar to that we've used in EAL for a number of years. This process has been supported all the way through by collaborative planning sessions with homeroom teachers, so that the ultimate goal will be when students are studying something with the homeroom teachers, they will be able to transfer those skills into their additional language, whether it be French, Vietnamese, Chinese. We're just at the start of this process, and as I just mentioned, one of the key things to its success, I believe, is collaboration. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now that we've gone through the initial stages of developing that buy-in and identifying the change and leading the change, identify who was leader, we need to implement it. And this is the stage that we're at now. And through this implementation, we needed a clearly defined timeline that helped us set these clear goals and be realistic. And the main thing is to be accountable, to know what needs to be done, who's doing it, and when it's going to be done by. Change is scary if you don't have that direction and the overall vision and you don't know where you're going. You don't want to be stuck on a winding path, do you, walking through the forest and not know what you need to do or which turns you need to take. So by the end of this school year, we hope that we're going to have our policy and curriculum statements approved and that they can then be shared with the school community. This then demystifies the learning for parents and students. They then know what is expected and what will happen in each lesson. Because a lot of the time we've had questions about how children could be studying a language for a number of years, but they can't converse in that language. So we're hoping with a clearly defined curriculum that's shared across languages, these expectations are known, and parents will then see what the students need to learn or what they are learning. So what's happening now in our stage is that we're now rolling out our curriculum and we're testing it to see if it is realistic. Because with 2.5 hours of teaching in primary and 3 hours in secondary, students don't get exposure to these languages as much as we'd like. And obviously living in Vietnam, they don't get to use the language outside of those lessons. So we're just making sure that it's realistic now and the expectations are realistic. But hopefully the students will be able to fulfill our school's mission of embracing their own independence and internationalism whilst being multilingual communicators who desire to learn from each other. And that's ultimately what our goal is, that we're supporting the students be confident, multilingual and international adults of the future who can use these languages successfully in their adult lives, whether it be at work or whether it be socializing or whether it be when they go to university. So that's our journey to date. And I would love to know how it works in your schools, basically. I mean, do you guys have a similar approach where your languages use the same curriculum statements, or do you have a separate curriculums for each language? Do you use a contextualized approach? Any feedback would be awesome.